My name's Lyndsay. Thanks for coming along. Once upon a time, in a team far, far away, I was asked to come and join them as a new delivery lead. And before I joined, I had the opportunity to work with them for a bit, just to observe how they're working. So I went along to their stand-ups and their planning and their retros, and just try and get a feel of what the team was like and how they operated before I took over from their incumbent delivery lead. And what I saw in that team reminded me of things I'd seen in other teams I've worked with over the last 10 years, was that they were doing things in a certain way that they were kind of repeating in terms of the way they did their stand-ups and the retros and the planning. They're repeating the same kind of approach time and time again, but I saw kind of very poor engagement from the team members in those ceremonies. And when I was looking at how their kind of service was impacting their customers, so what value they were adding week on week to the service that was running in production, I noticed that there are problems there as well. And that observation, that connection made me realize that ceremonies are really, really important, and our engagement in ceremonies are really, really important because they ultimately affect the kind of products we build or the service that we're providing to our customers. And that series of connections, observations, is what inspired this session. If we just kind of wind back a bit and think about what impacts the actual service that we're providing to our clients. Well, I'd like to start right down at the bottom with people's values. So their values are ultimately what affects how people behave. And people's behaviors at an individual level and also then at a team level, they affect how they kind of conduct themselves in certain activities, such as planning and stand-ups and retrospectives. And the outputs and the outcomes of those activities then can impact the delivered service. So let's look at a more concrete example. If you've got a team that they're doing the planning ceremony, and perhaps you've got a QA and a DevOps engineer on the team who don't feel very well respected or listened to by the developers on the team, and you notice that during planning, they don't feel like their voices and their opinions are being heard. So over time, they slowly reduce what they're kind of saying, they reduce the number of questions they're asking. And that has two impacts. So firstly, you're not hearing the things they care about, and the rest of the team aren't hearing them as well. So over time, that can lead to the planning sessions becoming very developer and QA focused or developer focused. And that can lead then to developers perhaps not thinking so much about testing or quality or operability, which can then also impact the service that you give your customers. So it might be that through planning, when they look at a particular story, they neglect to consider some of the reliability aspects because the DevOps engineer just doesn't feel like his voice is ever heard, so he doesn't bring those things up. And developers, I think they're happy with the story, they work on it, they get it into production, and there's a spike in load and the service goes down. So hopefully that example shows that if we can look at how our team members engage in our ceremonies and look at improving that, that can ultimately impact the service that our teams are building. The term I've given this is ceremony fatigue. So what do I mean by this, and what can we do about it? I was describing this talk to a friend of mine who doesn't work in IT. He comes from an engineering background, though, so he understands the kind of the process of building things. And he was perplexed at this phrase, ceremonies. And it even caused me to double check, is that what we really call planning and retros and stand-up? And yeah, we were all familiar that these things are called ceremonies. When he thinks about ceremonies, he thinks about weddings and baptisms and maybe going to an award ceremony. And he was quite kind of perplexed by what we did in these ceremonies. One of the things that I think ceremonies kind of suffer from is because we're doing the same thing kind of week after week, it becomes less of a practice and a habit and more of a rite or ritual. And with rites and rituals, when you're doing the same thing, going through the same motions week after week, then it's very easy just to disengage with those activities and just become focused on following the kind of step-by-step, going through the same kind of procedures without really thinking about what is it you're trying to achieve, what are the outcomes that you're wanting. And when that happens, I think your team is then suffering from ceremony fatigue. So what can we do about it? Well, we've got a few options. We can just hope that things are going to improve. That doesn't normally work out very well. We could also try harder. I'm a rubbish footballer. I'm rubbish at most sports, to be honest. And I always remember in my school reports, year after year, against PE, it was poor ball skills, could try harder. And unfortunately, no amount of trying harder at anything football-related would make me a better footballer. I just don't have the coordination or the ability to do it. So trying harder is just not an option for making engagement better. No amount of encouraging people to kind of focus and participate and bringing nicer food is going to help get people that are disengaged with ceremonies to engage better. What does help, though, is change. And this applies to if you're doing a kind of a repetitive thing that has lots of steps in it anyway. So if you're changing regularly how you're approaching something and making it fresher each time, then those changes can help you think about it slightly differently and can improve your engagement with that activity. The difficulty with change is that as humans, we find it difficult. We like the status quo. We like things as they are, and change can be very uncomfortable. So trying to change, particularly agile ceremonies that impacts the whole team, is quite a difficult thing to do, and it has to be done with care, but it's vitally important. So imagine that you're a new delivery lead or scrum master or agile coach. You've arrived at your new place, and you want to learn about the team. You want to study them, work out where their pain points are, and try and get a feel of how you can help improve their engagement with the different activities. What kind of things should we look for? So how are we going to try and do some kind of assessment of their engagement? Before we go and take lots of measurements and readings and do any kind of assessment, context is really, really important. And there's 3 different areas that we should look for context in. First is time. Going into a team on one day and just taking a bunch of readings and looking across the team's activities on one particular day is going to skew the results that you get. It's important to visit the team several different days during the week. It might be that everyone works from home on a Friday, or it might be that there's certain days when they're doing lots of releases, and those days are more pressurized than others. So attending things, particularly like stand-ups, attending them during different days when different people are present and different people are interacting in different ways is really important. It's also essential to take readings over the course of the delivery of an item. So if a team are working on a particular epic, their interactions are going to be subtly different when they kick off that epic to when it's nearing production, nearing getting into production, and as they're looking to monitor it. So trying to take readings over the course of delivery of a particular item is also important. The best time to see how a team really, really behaves is when everything's going wrong. When there's some kind of critical production issue happening, when their site's down or unresponsive. If you get the opportunity then to be with the team and observe what's happening, then I think you see the real essence of how they interact, how they behave, how they engage with each other. The next area of context that's essential is understanding the team's maturity. This is me playing a game of Go. How many people here play Go? Anyone play Go? Oh, a few people. Great, excellent. Playing Go with my good friend Phil. Now, Phil, he's been playing Go for 30 years more than I, and he's brilliant at it. So whenever we play, he's very good because he's very patient with me, and he gives me feedback and tips as we're playing. But the feedback he's giving me and the way he's playing with me, he's adjusted it because of my relative immaturity when it comes to playing Go. And so it is when you're trying to assess an Agile team's engagement. You need to understand where are they in their journey with Agile. The Shuhari model, I think, works really well when you're trying to assess a team's maturity. So are they still learning the Agile principles and practices and how to apply them to their particular service, their particular context? So in that case, they're probably going to be quite rigidly following the rules. The next level would be the HAR model, HAR level, sorry. So have they got now enough experience they can start adapting the Agile rules and principles to their service? adapting it to their team members and their own particular way of doing things. They might have started off with Scrum and then realized that there's some ceremonies that they can tweak or some aspects of Scrum that they can start dropping or changing. Then the final level of maturity, which is often kind of referred to as mastery, is so where they're now able to write the rules themselves. So sometimes they'll be kind of breaking some of the basic rules of Scrum, where they're breaking it with the deeper knowledge and understanding that they can break them and change them in a way that is appropriate for their context. The third area of context that's a must is the ecosystem the team works within. Very, very few teams work in complete isolation. All teams normally use some kind of set of tools to get things into production or into the hands of their customers. So you need to understand, how do those tools impact the team? Are they working with things that are really, really difficult, that slow them down, cause lots of frustrations? Are they working with code that kind of impedes them in a significant way? Finally, what other teams are they dependent on, or what teams are dependent on them? Those interactions between different teams and different systems will also affect their behaviors and the things that come up in their different ceremonies. So having understood the context of the team, what kind of things should we be looking for as we try and look for these indicators over time? The best set of values for me that I always go back to is the values from the Agile Manifesto. When I'm looking at a team, I'm wanting to see people talking to each other, people interacting, rather than just interacting through Jira or kind of following documents or following procedure. I want to see people actually talking to each other, be it through Slack or preferably face-to-face. I prefer to see a team that are focused on getting working software into production early and often, as opposed to just trying to design a feature and then think about, okay, how are we going to make this the greatest feature ever and get it tested lots and lots in QA, and then spend another week or 2 weeks or more doing a UAT and then finally getting into production. I'm looking for teams that are thinking about the customer, thinking about production at every aspect of the work they're doing. And then finally, how do the team handle changing circumstances? How do they handle a production issue? How do they handle the customer suddenly changed their mind? How well do they embrace change? The first place I go to try and get a reading on the team's health is their stand-up. And just standing back from the stand-up and observing how they interact is really interesting. So the kind of things that I look for that could relate to the 4 Agile values are body language. So are people on their phones the whole time? Are they engaged with each other? Are there people who are kind of standing in a huddle, or are there some people that are at the back being blocked by other people? All of these things give you an indication of how the team engage with each other and engage with the ceremony. What's the balance of dialogue across the team like? So is it that the Scrum Master is standing at the front and just reading through the board, or are people going through the board focusing on just what's in development? Is there a balance of dialogue that's fairly even across all the roles within the team? What's the main focus of their stand-up? Are you seeing a stand-up that's just become a status report where people are going through the motions of, what did they do yesterday, what they're doing today, what's blocking them, and then that's it, they all disperse? Or are they focused on how, as a team, they can get some increment closer to production that day? The most interesting thing is then what happens at the end of stand-up. And this can vary quite a lot. So you might see that the team just disperses and they all go off and start doing their own thing. Or often some things might have come up during the stand-up and they'll then be having some mini meetings or discussions that come as a result of the stand-up. Might be that the team goes for coffee together. So all of these things that you see are indicators of how well the team engage with each other and are taking the outcomes from the stand-up and applying them to the rest of the day. Let's look at planning next. The first indicator that I think is really important about planning is that it happens. Now, as these 2 quotes talk about, we need to be prepared that our plans are always going to change. But even when you're doing Kanban, I think it's really important that you see the team get together when they're about to pick up a piece of work and do some planning together. They're going to work out how they're going to approach this particular problem, how they're going to work through it as a team and get it into production. The second indicator that I look for is in their actual planning session. And this is similar to what you see in what I'm looking for in the stand-up. So is there a balanced conversation across all of the roles where they're looking at all the different architectural realities? I remember the first time I heard Kevlin Henney speak about 10 years ago at QCon. He talked there about architectural realities. This is a list of some of them that he referenced. When I'm in a planning session, I'm wanting to see a range of discussion across the team. So not just developers, so developers, QAs, DevOps, UX people. Consider all the different abilities that they should be thinking about for the particular feature that they're trying to get into production. So having looked at some indicators of the health of the team, what can we do then to try and improve engagement? So we're going to have a look now at some examples of two particular ceremonies that I've done some adaptations with in some different teams. Let's first of all look at planning. The particular problem that I had with planning that led to this adaptation was poor engagement across the team. The QAs in the team didn't feel that they were listened to. They didn't kind of contribute much. They were afraid to ask questions. The same with the DevOps engineer on the team. He was shared with another team, so he wasn't able to come along to all of our meetings. And the team, as a result, weren't thinking enough about operability concerns. And there's quite a wide variety in the developers in terms of what kind of things they were thinking about, what questions they asked in planning sessions. And because of this kind of varied and poor engagement, it meant that the outcome of planning was very unpredictable. They would come out of it with a set of stories, with a set of points, and some rough idea of how they were going to approach it. And then when you looked at what happened over the next series of days and weeks, it bore very little resemblance to what they talked about in planning. And as a result, things took kind of longer to get into production. They had issues in production. And so the customers of the service weren't very happy. The senior stakeholders of the service weren't very happy. And the team itself were really frustrated as well because they just felt that they weren't really in control of what they were delivering and how they were delivering it. The way I approached this was to do nothing at first because I wanted to get more data. So I just let the planning continue as it was and went along to their planning sessions so I could try and understand the problem better, to understand why were certain people quiet, why were certain people talking more than others. Having got more data to understand the problem, I was then able to split planning into these different sections so I could work on each with greater focus. We're going to look next at just a couple of them, so what we did with estimation and planning. Estimation was a whole problem in itself. The team were using Fibonacci numbers, doing that normal style of estimation, but it was taking a long time, and the outcome of it didn't correlate with the time they're investing on it. You would see a lot of discussion over something was a 1, a 3, a 7, and they'd eventually come up with a number, start working the card, and sometimes a 1 would take weeks and weeks, and sometimes a 7 would take a day. There just seemed to be very little correlation. And this was frustrating for me, and it was frustrating for the team, frustrating for the stakeholders. And ultimately, I wanted to move them to a place where they didn't need to estimate. The approach that I used on this was, again, to start with the status quo, to let them continue doing their planning sessions as they were, but kind of observe what was happening at a deeper level. Try and understand who were the people that were arguing the most, and why were they so kind of passionate about working out what the number was. I also realized that there was a fundamental problem with the way that they were breaking up the stories. So I did some work with the BA and different people on the team to help improve how they split their stories up. Then before changing the actual kind of estimation process or method, I had a series of conversations with the team over a period of weeks where we looked at different ways of estimating and got their opinion on using, effectively not estimating versus Fibonacci numbers. So which people thought was a good idea, which people thought was a bad idea, what were the reasons that they felt for or against making a change. And doing that allowed people to feel listened to and for me to more carefully kind of pitch the change that we were going to come up with. Then we tried it out, and we used these cards from New Logic. Thanks for Phil Parker for pointing me in their direction. Has anyone used these cards before? Okay, just one person. So they're great. If your team wants to try an interesting way of estimating, then which isn't estimating, then I recommend these cards. So that the way it works is we got in a room and I helped reassure people that, okay, we're going to do some estimation, but you've got three choices, essentially, when you're estimating something. You're either going to say it's a 1, or it's too effing big, or it's you got no effing clue about what it is. And if it's a TFB, then that's something that we need to look at splitting and have a conversation about, how do we split it down and then allow us to re-estimate it. Or if something that we've got no effing clue about, then that's probably something we might want to spike out or have a separate workshop to understand a bit better. And what was amazing with using these cards was that some of the people that were very passionate about using Fibonacci numbers and really loved the hassling, the negotiation between a 1 and a 7, they engaged with these cards really well. And they thought, well, this is great. I'm still estimating. And over a period of sessions of using these cards, they quickly realized that actually we don't really need cards. We just need to think about the story, discuss it, consider all the different abilities, and then we decide, is there a 1 or not? And that process kind of worked really well over time. If we step back then from kind of what we actually did and look at a kind of higher level, rather than going into the team and saying, what we're doing is wrong, let's try this new thing, it's going to be better. It's important to work with the team to understand what is the outcome that we want as a team. What we were trying to achieve with estimation was to be able to understand the complexity in these stories and to be able to break the stories up into kind of cohesive lumps that we can then kind of work through and get into production in a kind of at a low cost. How we achieved that wasn't really kind of so important, as long as we achieved that outcome. The second principle that I found really helpful was using low-cost experiments. So reassuring the team that we're just going to try something out. And we'll try it out for a week or two, and if it works, then let's keep doing it. If it doesn't work, we can go back to how we did things before, or we can try something else. Getting the team's input and getting them to kind of share their kind of frustrations and their hopes about any changes to the estimation method was also really essential, because it gave them ownership of the change that we're making as a team. If you've not read Switch and then you're involved in doing any kind of change process, I highly recommend it. It's got some great ideas for helping teams change or helping organizations change at a kind of great bigger level. We've now got a bunch of stories that are all roughly the same size. The next thing we want to do is try and put some kind of sequence to them. And because we've got dependent systems and stakeholders that need ultimately a date or a time period when these series of epics are going to be released, we need to come up with a plan. So how are we going to do this? What do we do? The approach that I took with the team to try and improve this was to do some planning for planning before we actually had the planning session. So before we got the whole team together in a room, I'd have small conversations with different people on the team. So talk to the product owner and the business analyst and our senior stakeholders about what was the real benefit that we were trying to achieve with this change. So really understand why we were making these changes. It's also important to get context before your planning session. So look at what else is happening in your team, in your organization over the coming weeks that you're trying to plan for. Are there new people joining? Are there people leaving? Is there an office move happening? Is there a significant system change that's going to be happening at the same time? Really think through what the different risks and dependencies are. And this might be a conversation with your DevOps engineer, your tech lead, your QA. So getting all this data before the actual planning session really helps frame the planning much better. There might be various different aspects to the epics that you're going to be planning. So it's important for each epic to think, who are the experts in the area that we're changing and who is impacted by it? So if we're making a change that is going to have significant impact on our customers, that might generate lots of support calls. Have you spoken to the contact center that will take those calls? So do they need to provide input into the sequencing of the stories or the scheduling of them? So having done all this preparation for planning, we can then go on and do the actual planning session. I think it's really important to give the team context at the start. So make it really clear, what is the thing that we're trying to achieve? What is our goal? Particularly if your team is working collectively together on a kind of interrelated set of epics for a period of weeks, and having a clear goal that you can keep going back to at the start of every stand-up, start of every kind of retrospective and planning session is really helpful for focusing people and for effectively weighing up decisions, because you're coming back ultimately, how is this going to move us closer to this goal? I then find it's really helpful to draw the system out that we're changing. They do a very simple diagram on a whiteboard, preferably, because it's low cost and easy to change, of the system as is before we're about to make all these changes to it. And then provide further context. So what's actually happening over the next few weeks that we're trying to plan for? Who's on holiday? Have we got any new team members starting? Have we got any teams themselves that are going to be forming around us? This is all really important context for your team to consider as they do the planning. The next step is to overlay that with what the kind of ultimate system is going to be. So you'll have already worked this out with your team through the design session and your slicing, which I don't have time to go into today. But as well as showing what the end state is that your team's agreed, it's important then to look at how are you planning to evolve your system from the current state to the end state. Then I'll put index cards up to show all the epics that the team have agreed. But I won't have sequenced them. I'll just stick them up. And this is where then the team can own what happens next. So the team will then work out, okay, what's the right order to do these epics in? You know, what's the kind of either the quickest thing to get into production first or the most risky thing that we want to get into production first and learn from? So the team will get them into a suitable order. And then they can do the scheduling. So when do we think we can get these epics delivered into production? And I've used this process with lots of different teams now, and it's a very, very low-cost kind of way of coming up with a plan that the team is happy with. Because it's quite easy to change as well. We'll come on to the kind of changing part in this section in a second. So this is a photo of a planning whiteboard that I used with one particular team. And so the kind of smudged out area is the as-is system diagram overlaid with the 2B diagram. Then you've got the kind of yellow post-it notes that show the sprints. And then under it, you've got the index cards that show the kind of epics that the team have sequenced. So having done the plan and something the team are happy with, they're going to start working on it. It's important to keep coming back to that plan, both with your team, but also with people that are dependent on your team or other services that you're interacting with. And so walk people through effectively your board on a regular basis, and then update it as things change. Let's now talk about retros. I have a confession to make. I hate retros. And the reason I hate retros, which is probably a terrible thing to say at an Agile conference, is I worry about them so much. I worry that people won't like them. I worry that, that people won't get anything from them and they'll find them boring and a waste of time. So retro is a really difficult ceremony for me to improve or to do full stop. In one particular team I joined, it was really helpful because they love retros. In fact, they love retros so much, they didn't want me to change them at all. They were very, very happy us doing the same form of retro every 2 weeks and just no changes, please. But they wanted to turn up, they wanted to kind of go through the motions, and they were very happy. So that made my life a little bit easier, except I think the consequence of doing the same format for the last 2 years had left them quite disengaged. So they would go through the motions, the same kind of things would come up every retro, and you'd see very little kind of progress or positive outcomes coming from that. So what did we do? How did we improve things? So as normal, I wouldn't make any changes to start off with. Just go through the normal motions so you can start collecting more data and understand what the kind of root of the real problem is. Then start making some small changes. So instead of doing the kind of regular retro format, we did a futurespective. Some people enjoyed it. Other people complained at the end that it wasn't the normal retro format, but it was just kind of one session. The next time we went back to the regular retro format. So every so often we'd just try and make a small change to come up to experience a new format that they could engage with in a different way. After experimenting with a few different formats over time, we then did a retro, where we talked as a team about, okay, what's working with our retros, what's not working, how can we actually improve our retros? And that was a really useful thing to do, because the team came up with lots of ideas themselves about what would work, what would be better, what wouldn't work. I had some ideas myself that I thought, well, if we made this particular change or tried this out, then it would definitely improve things. We discussed those with the team, and they were quite clear, though, this wasn't what they wanted to do. So doing the retro was really useful. It came up with some new ideas about what we would want out of a future retro. And this led me to using banagrams in a retro. So who here has played or heard of banagrams? Excellent. Quite a few of you. Okay, so if you've not ever come across banagrams, it's a bit like Scrabble, but more fun and easier. I don't like Scrabble, I'm rubbish at it. But my wife is excellent at Scrabble, so which is probably why I don't like it. With banagrams, we have much more of an even game. And you basically can play it in all sorts of different ways, but you have a bag of letters, and if your normal way I play it is that each person has their own letters that they can have face down, and you then take 7 letters, turn them up the right way, and you've got to build an interconnecting set of words. And then once you've got all your letters used up, all the letters you start with used up, you then take another letter, and you can change the words as you're going. And we'll see this in action in a minute. I've played this for years and years, and I keep thinking, wow, this is so much like Agile. It would be perfect to use with a team, but I never had the opportunity to use it. And the team, when we did the retro, they were saying, yeah, we want to make retros much more fun. And I thought, I know how we're going to do that. So the way I prepared for the retro was think very carefully, what is it we want specific to achieve with this retro? I think it's useful that when you're doing retros, not just to kind of go into it with a kind of a standard format or kind of a new format without thinking, what's important to the team right now? What are the kind of different things that they might be struggling with? What issues are you seeing now, or what issues do you see coming up? So have they got an important release in a few weeks where a futurespective would be quite helpful to de-risk? So be very clear on what you think is important to yourself and the team to kind of look at in the retro. Think then about kind of the independence of these aspects. So if there's problems in your team, say, between how the team are working with the product owner and the BA, it's probably really, really important that the product owner and BA can actually attend the retro. So you need to think about when you're going to have it and make sure it's at a time when those people are going to be there. The format is really important. So with the banagrams, we had to make sure we had a kind of space large enough to all sit around and have the letters. We'd also discussed in the retro about doing it somewhere else, like outside of the building, maybe in a pub. So that then meant some kind of arduous research, looking at all the local pubs, working out which had the right kind of open space to use for a retro. And thinking about kind of where is also important. So making sure that you can use a venue that is going to work for kind of people on your team. And you can see that there's quite a lot of planning that needs to go on in order to kind of work out when you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, and what kind of format. Not everyone likes banagrams, just should caution you before you try that in your next team retro. In fact, there was one person on team who absolutely hated banagrams, and I had to wait for him to leave before we used banagrams in our retro. So other games do exist, okay? So what did we do? How did we get started? The team arrived at the pub. We had a nice open space that we could use. And before we launched into kind of banagrams itself, explained to the team why we were doing this. So what was kind of the objectives of the retro? What we're trying to tackle as a team in this retro? And then work through how we were going to do that. So what was the kind of effectively like the tools or the aids that we were going to use to try and flush out some of the kind of things we wanted to learn from this retro. In this particular case, we were going to use banagrams, and the format that I came up with is that I had a starting grid of words. So, and this is the actual grid that we had in the retro. So you started with some words. The team's name was Night's Watch. So I thought, look, let's start with a word that's relevant to the team. Then we added some easy words that people could add to. So if you've not played banagrams, having words with no vowels in them is really difficult then to add new kind of letters to those words. So I had to choose a kind of set of words that would be easy for people to work with. Then the rules that we were following was that each person had 3 letters and would go around the circle. When it got to their turn, they had to take one letter and share something about themselves that letter kind of stood for. Because the team didn't feel like they really interacted that much other than just about work, and they wanted to get to know each other. That was one letter. The second letter was some form of appreciation for either somebody on the team or for the team as a whole. Then the third letter was the more kind of standard retro thing. So what things did they think we should stop doing, improve, etc. And we went around, each person using their 3 letters and coming up with these different things. The principles that we're following were really, really interesting. This, I think, was where the kind of this retro format was pure gold, because I encouraged the team to think about collaborating as we were doing this. So rather than just watching some poor person struggle to figure out, where am I going to put these letters on the grid, particularly with people whose English wasn't their first language, the team could help each other. So it really encouraged the team to help work together to help someone put their letters onto the grid and build it up as you see here. It helped us think about how we respond to change. So with banagrams, you can rearrange the words at any point in the game, and encouraging people to say that's okay to make changes as we're going was a useful thing for us to be reminded about. And finally, as people were sharing new things about themselves, that it was a really great opportunity to remind us of the importance of learning, both about each other, but also learning about the English language. Particularly when you're playing in a large group, the different words that people come up with is just fascinating, and it can expand your vocabulary so well. So just to recap, from what I've seen, ceremonies are really important because ultimately, we do Agile ceremonies for a reason. We have them because we believe that they're important and that they generate outcomes that ultimately affect the service or product that our teams are delivering. Those outcomes are going to be degraded if teams don't engage well in those ceremonies. If you're working with a team as a delivery lead or Agile coach or Scrum Master, I think it's important to look at your team's context. So to understand where are they at in their maturity level, what are the things that impinge them or strengthen them as a team. And then look at your different ceremonies and try and do some kind of readings of different indicators that will give you an idea of the health of their engagement in different ceremonies. And then try something new. And I think it's really important that the team tries something new, not you impose something new on the team. Having a team own the change is kind of essential. No slide deck is complete without a nice animal picture. This is my cat. I hope it makes the world a better place for you all by seeing a nice cat picture on some slides. This was the first time I've done this session. I'm going to be doing it again in Lean Agile Scotland and hopefully lots of other places. So if you can improve the future engagement for people when they go through this session, I'd love to have your feedback through Twitter, direct afterwards, or by email. Apologies if you don't like cats, by the way. And thank you for listening. Is there any questions? We've got a few minutes for questions, if anyone wants a question.
Can you just go over again how the game works? So you've got your 3 letters. Do they make a word, or do they put down a letter and say that letter?
Right, so this is our starting grid, okay? And let's do, so starting grid. Yeah, I'll have to write this up.
Each one of their letters.
Yes.
So each one of the letters you use for a different thing on the previous one.
If you look at the word die there, and someone's added FNS to it to make fens, so the whole grid is being used by everyone.
So do they say F, I'm friendly?
Yeah.
N,
Yeah. I want to thank somebody for, or something beginning with N or whatever. So it's just using that to help trigger different kind of ideas, which you might not have thought of if you were just doing it with no one.
And is there like a rule that you can't change the name of the team?
No, but we embrace change, right? So if we want to change the name of the team, we'll do it right now. There's no...
No, what I mean is like while playing the game.
Yes, you can change anything. Yes. Yeah. That happened just... and that's how often when you play banagrams, you'll have one word that tends not to change till the very end when you're really in a tight spot and you need to completely change it. So you can change it at any point. Any other questions? Great. Thank you very much, folks.